Okay, people, I just wanted to do the Shakespeare poem that we were doing together, or that I asked you to read. We'll do it a little bit more quickly. What am I doing here? Let's see. There it is. Sonnet 18. So let's read it through. I think maybe Shakespeare's most famous sonnet, no? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. So Shakespeare, let's read it the whole thing through first. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair that thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So it's a poem that simultaneously reads as like very easy and very hard at the same time. Let's go with the very hard. The last line, let's read it backwards, really. So long lives this. Shakespeare is obviously in this poem dealing with the relationship between the temporal and the eternal. Interesting that Shakespeare does this in a love poem. Usually that gets done in epic poems. We have experience with some of them, right? The Iliad, the Odyssey, I mean, all the works, the epics that we read, which are concerned with beginnings and endings. Here it's Christian, so it's different. We'll talk more about it, but you do see, right? We do see that in the first part of the poem, you'll break it down for me, the 4-4-4-2. In the second quatrain, we see this idea of temporal decline. And often is his gold complexion dimmed, right? Sometime too hot, starting above. Sometime too hot, the eye of heaven shines. It's the sun burns too hot, and often is his gold complexion dim. Sometimes it gets dark, and every fair from fair sometime declines. An idea of decline, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. I don't know what untrimmed means. Let's go to the OED. We do actually have it at Bar Ilan, which is kind of cool. Let's see, that's not the one. So you just type it in, untrimmed, and I would be afraid that it's not going to be here, but it's going to be here because, let's see, untrimmed. It's a rare word, and it's located in 1609 as the first entry. Now look what you can do here. It gives you the full entry. So here, this is a good one to look at, and look what's quoted first. Is Shakespeare. He probably invents the word, right? Probably the first one to use it. Our sonnet, every fair from fair time to sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. And then it gives us the usages again 2 years after, and then again in 1832, and then it doesn't really get used again. If we were to look at another word, let me just, as an example, melancholy is a good one because its meaning changes. It's giving us a lot of different possibilities here. Wow, right? So here, instead of seeing 2 or 3 entries, we see this one goes from 1375 to 1580, then 1390 to 1991. And it will change over time. I mean, there are obviously lots of possible meanings here. Back to us for untrimmed. Let's see. So this, and look at the next one. By fans or nature's changing course untrimmed. But we didn't even look up what the meaning was. My bad. It's to deprive of trimness or elegance, to strip of ornament. So nature is stripped of its ornament, the changing course, things wear down. And then, but thy, it really sounds like a Christian poem, but then we remember it's a love poem. But thy eternal summer, his beloved, shall not fade. Why? Nor lose possession of that fair thou ownest, I think. I think. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade. You're never going to die. When? Why? In eternal lines to time thou growest. The claim, we talked about this, right? Um, and Shakespeare, I guess, is being serious here. That, I mean, it's playful in a way because he's bringing together two entirely different things. This idea of eternity, which we associate with God, time and eternity. You'll see when we get to Paradise Lost, the natural follower of Homer and Virgil and Dante. When we get to Paradise Lost, you'll see that Milton is dealing with these variables, but from a uniquely Christian point of view. We underestimate the extent to which Shakespeare is a Christian poet. And you see that in this sonnet for sure. But the claim that Shakespeare is making, when in eternal lines to the time thou growest, is that poetry is somehow eternal. Language somehow creates something that's eternal. It's an incredible kind of statement to make. The rabbis make this claim, the rabbis of the Talmud make this claim in relationship to Hebrew, that the words themselves have a certain kind of holiness. And I think they attribute holiness to the words because they believe that language can also be eternal. Shakespeare is finding some other way to say this. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or our eyes can see. Now this penultimate line perplexes me. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. I mean, I guess you could read it as so long as men can breathe or eyes can read, meaning what does breathing and eyes seeing have to do with it, right? It would have to do, as long as people read my poem, you will be eternal. But let's read it as he writes it. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, as long as people are alive, so long lives this. Because Shakespeare's version of the human is breathing and seeing. As long as somebody can do that, kind of confidence here. Remember, we saw the lack of confidence in Tottle. Nobody is going to understand this. And Shakespeare says, so long forever, as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. The power of poetry. Remember Aristotle, he says something like, right, remember to understand something that's less known or half known through the better known, something that's unknown or less known to the better known, right? So, and he calls it translatio, translating from one realm to another, kind of the micro version of the cultural translation that we see in the Renaissance. It happens on the level of metaphor, a transfer from one realm to another. And he says that, well, metaphors will give us new things, give us new perceptions. And he says that the poet, someone, maybe Homer, says he imagines an older person as a withered stalk. So that image for Aristotle conveys a certain quality about age that otherwise could not be conveyed. It takes us beyond the literal into something. Withered sounds old, stalk slightly more organic and upright. That poetry, metaphor, creates what we see. So long lives this poem, and this poem gives life to thee. It's not only just that he's giving life to the beloved, he's making a claim for poetry. Let's read the beginning. We really read this backwards, but let's go back. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? What's the answer to that question? I guess yes. Thou art more lovely and more temperate beyond language, right? Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, they're subject to time. And summer's leaf has all too short a date, subject to time. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, it's uncomfortable, and often is his glow complexion dimmed. I think what's important here is not the discomfort, but sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. And every fair, it changes, and every fair from fair sometime declines. It's a story of decline and change. By chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But you see now how clear it is after we read backwards to read up. You see the whole first part of the poem. The first, is it the first two quatrains or first two quatrains are about decline. And also the last, the penultimate one, or the last quatrain. By chance or nature's changing course untrimmed, but thy, oh, that's interesting. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. Why am I stopping here? Because we're in the middle of a quatrain, right? This is a quatrain, right? A B A B A B A B A B A B, and we stop. Oh no, so right. This is the last quatrain. Good. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose. So that makes the break makes sense. So we see the way the structure actually reflects the meaning. I thought there was something up there that Shakespeare was not following, but he's following the structure. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Poetry is what gives life. It's what sustains life. It's what makes, this is the claim, poetry, poetic language, sacred language, transcends the literal. And that transcending the literal also has something to do with transcending the temporal, going beyond. For our purposes, we've been, I mean, look at Shakespeare, what he does with this genre, right? It's a long, long way from Wyatt. It's so much more conversational. It's the language flows so much more easily. And we see Shakespeare, like we will see many of the poets. We said, why poetry? Because there, I think, is a belief in metaphor as transformative. That metaphor does things that other things don't do. Remember, we're kind of, what's happening now is we're leaving the church. The church is no longer just the realm of the sacred. The poets of our period, they're all Christians, but they're saying that the language of the sacredness that had been only in the church can now be taken out. How does it do that? With language. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Great poem.